Are you thinking of leaving corporate, but too afraid to make the move? Have you already escaped corporate, but are finding it hard to run your dream business? Are you wasting valuable time by attempting to figure challenges out on your own? We have created a podcast for corporate escapees running their own business. This is the Corporate Escapees Podcast by Build, Live, Give. We bring you firsthand experiences of guests going through many of the struggles you face each and every day as a corporate escapee. We get real with no corporate BS. And now, over to your host, Paul Higgins.
Welcome and hello to Corporate Escapees, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of people who are successfully running their own businesses, hearing their war stories and motivations for making the jump from their corporate gig. I'm your host, Paul Higgins, and our guest today is someone who has an amazing academic career. He was working on Wall Street and doing about 100 hours a week, and his wife suggested this was not going to be the best for his family. So he left, and he's become one of the global thought leaders in Fintech, and he shares a great perspective in this interview. So what I'll do now is hand you over to Alexander Lowry. Welcome, Alexander Lowry, to Corporate Escapees, brought to you by Build, Live, Give. So we're going to get to know a lot about you today, Alexander. But why don't we start with something that your family or friends would know about you that we wouldn't?
So my family and friends would probably tell you, I talk about it all the time. So we have our first child, and she just turned 1 last week. So I think if we put it in the corporate mindset, Paul, so for me, most of us probably listening to this have spent our whole life trying to get really good at something in terms of our career. And now I have what I consider the most important thing in my life, and I openly know nothing about it, right? I'm growing and developing as a father every single day, and I feel like I'm playing catch up all the time. So this is what my friends hear me, sort of my running dialogue.
Yeah, well, look, I was once given this advice. So the advice was, don't listen to any advice. That was the only advice I was given. And it sort of worked out pretty well. So, yeah, I'm sure you and Rebecca will be great parents, and it'll work out. But it's definitely not linear, and it's not science, and it's not probably a lot of what you've done in your past, which we'll get to in a moment. But I suppose on that topic, why don't you talk a little bit about your great career and how you sort of ended up going into business for yourself?
Sure. So for me, it started when I left university. I went into management consulting, and I think that's an amazing start to a career for a lot of people. For one thing, if you're, say, 21 years old, you are working way above your pay grade. You're sitting with executives of Fortune 500 companies. You're traveling the world. You're solving problems. You're working with companies like Coca-Cola, et cetera. It's just the amazing situation, different industries, different situations, and you learn so much, and you're like a sponge, and you soak it up. And I did that for a dozen years, including working for a British company, sent over to headquarters in London, had a fabulous time. But I'd always wanted to be in Wall Street, and it was an itch that I wanted to scratch. So I went to Wharton and got my MBA, which gave me that finance brand, and forever I've seen in that way now. And from there, I joined JP Morgan, and I worked there for 4.5 years in a COO capacity. And it was probably when we were engaged, Rebecca, the lovely and talented, I call her, said to me, you doing 100 hours a week at a bank's not going to do a lot for us. So we started to step back and think about, okay, do we want to buy a house and settle down? Should we move somewhere? And this opportunity came up to be at Gordon College, and they wanted to start a 1-year master's in finance program to be a competitive MBA programs to be able to get students through faster, much less debt, but also do the comparable same technical skill set. So there's an opportunity to come up here and be a professor of finance, which built on all of my interests and my skill set, but have a much higher quality of life and live 5 minutes down the road and be able to see my child morning and night. So in many ways, it's been fantastic. So I'm sure that you would say the exact same thing. No regrets, right? I loved what I did before, but very happy in this area,
Yes.
Running this small business inside the college now.
Yeah, look, spot on. I think, like you, I just learned so much through my career, which was brilliant. And, every day I sort of come back and there's things that I apply, but would I swap it and go back? No. It's an easy decision. And, for you, the transition, was it harder or easier than you expected?
Both, but in different ways than I expected. So academia is its own beast, and I think I was absolutely naive in terms of what would happen. Just a quick story. You think about like hard-charging Wall Street firms like a JP Morgan, where you're in a room full of people and you make a decision and you are marching arm in arm towards that goal. Like this is a business-oriented environment. And I showed up in academia. They brought me in. I'm building this program, department chair, making all these decisions. We're in meetings. Everyone's saying yes, yes, yes. Off we go. I turned around a week later and there's nobody marching with me. I'm on my own. Thinking, what happened here, right? Well, it's a slower moving beast and people are really nice, but they're really busy. And I'm thinking, but that's not how decisions work. So, I'm adjusting to that. It wasn't what I expected, and that's probably naive on my part, but I basically am surrounded by very nice, very friendly colleagues. No one yells anymore, and there's nothing thrown across the room at anybody. You think about all the stuff you see on Wall Street, you're like, I guess that's normal. And you get to the real world, and you're like, that's not normal.
Yeah, so true, so true. And sort of help. Did you get any help as you made the transition?
So I had a lot of internal support. So coming into a senior role here, there was a very, very clear sense from management of we need someone with your background and expertise that has the credibility. So whatever you need from us within the limited confines of what nonprofit educational institutes can provide, but certainly the time and the energy and support. And I think the best example for me of we moved up here in October. My daughter wasn't supposed to be born until January, but like her father, she's an overachiever and decided to come 2 months early to our surprise. And the entire institution saying, whatever you need, we'll cover for you, we'll do whatever you want. I'm thinking like, if I'd been back at JP Morgan, I'd probably had like 24 hours off. They'd expected me back. So I think that's the example of the type of amazing support we got.
Yeah, brilliant. So look, we'll go into the next section, which is the build section. And when someone asks you now, Alexander, what you do, how do you describe that?
So I explain it as we have a small business that we run inside the university. And what we're trying to do is no less than innovate the entire education industry. We want to upend the model. So business schools are, I went to Wharton's, but everyone assumes you have to go to business school. It's a race to get into the top programs. It's a race to pay them. Average MBA tuition's $140,000. And top schools like Wharton, Harvard, it's like $200,000, which is crazy amounts of money. We don't think that's required. We think you can still say check the advanced degree box at a faster, better, more affordable opportunity while getting the same skill set and getting on your way. And we think that'll appeal to millennials more. So I'm an ambitious person, and I'm trying to change the industry.
Great. And, I know so much noise around at the moment around the fintech space and, how the financial industry is going to change. Tell us a little bit about your view on that, how the industry's set to change, because I know that, myself and other people listening right now would love to get your perspective on that.
Well, that's one of the pride and joys now of I have a lot more bandwidth to do. I do lots of board roles for fintech and financial services companies, and it is absolutely fascinating. Just as you said, it's changing the industry. So think about a JP Morgan, and we'll compare a JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, two of the names you would know. So JP Morgan, if you want to think about it, would be two like size A0 pieces of paper to trace back the history hundreds of years of all of these various mergers from different places, which means you have lots of legacy systems coming in. So Bank One, where JP Morgan got Jamie Dimon when they bought that company about 12 years ago, you will still see servers inside JP Morgan that have the Bank One address first when you type them in. They still haven't, that's 12 years later, still haven't changed that. It's such a big, complex beast, right? So
Yes.
For them to be able to change and go to the fintech is really hard. Goldman Sachs, on the other hand, much smaller. Goldman Sachs has maybe, I think, 30,000 people. JP Morgan's got 250,000. All of their technology is in-house proprietary, built on their own. They've never done acquisitions. So in some ways, it's much easier for them to do some things like a fintech. But most of the companies are more, Bank of America, JP Morgan, big conglomerates like that, where they're trying to compete with startups who basically get to build a process from scratch, get to do straight through processing, get to change all of the industry standards. That is really hard to compete with, which is why fintechs are fascinating. Now, a place like JP Morgan would say, okay, Mr. Hoodie, you're going to find out from the regulator in about a year that you're not doing some of the stuff that they want you to do in terms of protecting data or looking after your customers in the right way. So there are both sides of the perspective of the right way to do it, but there's no question that fintechs are changing the game to the point where Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan, says all the time, we are a fintech company. What he means by that is we have some of the most amazing tech people in-house building stuff, or we will partner, or we will buy out some of the best companies because we've got the deep pockets. So fintech is changing the space.
Great. And what's going to be the impact of this on, small businesses? So most of, like you, we're people that have left corporate now running our own business. What's going to be the impact of some of the changes in fintech for a small business?
Well, one of the big things, of course, the costs will be coming down. You think about when you get more competition in the space, it's going to shake things up. For many of people who, especially of the younger side, perhaps, thinking about starting up their businesses or hiring the people, you'll have more technology-oriented solutions, which allows you more flexibility of where you're doing your work and how you're doing your work and perhaps where the team is that you're hiring. So all of that will dramatically change the model for the best. Of course, for some people, that'll make it harder because you've got to keep up with what's the new solution. If I'm competing against people that are using that new technology, but I'm not, is that holding me back? So I guess you could argue good and bad, but I think overall, just a lot of upside.
Yeah, look, I can't talk for the US, but here in Australia, I know that even to get a lease, a car lease for my vehicle, a car lease for my company, I should say, it was about a 50-page hand-printed document that I had to print out, hand sign, send back. I'm like, I just cannot believe that. I do everything on my mobile phone, like you said, pre-interview, and it's like, why am I still physically printing out all this paper, hand signing it, and sending it? It was
Well,
crazy.
for me, that's one of the good examples. So a lot of the startups that I work with, all of the documents we do back and forth are on the equivalent of like a legal Zoom. They're on the online databases where they can collect all the signatures instantly and electronically. And you think about, you've got to update the shareholding on a regular basis when you raise the next round. That is so much easier to do. And it sort of boggles the mind for the average retail person to say, how come when I open a credit card or get the lease, like you said, I have all of this paperwork I've got to fill out? Now the bank is beginning, so JP Morgan, for example, to digitize a lot of that. And you can sit with your banker and they can have it online. You can read through it and sign your name electronically, but it's still going to take you an hour to do it all because there's so much. And they've gotten better, but the systems are still clunky. They still don't work as well as they should. Whereas you think you join one of the fintech startups and use their service, it's probably 2 minutes and it's done. And a good example of that is when you're a new hire at Google on your first day, you walk in, you sit down at a computer to give you, you fill out whatever data you need, and then it goes all off to the different places from one single form. And they're smartly able to figure out, well, okay, all systems need this first row and two of the systems need this second row, and it just goes out. And we all sit here going, but that's the way it should work, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, totally get it. And just a quick pivot, but just on your experience, I know that you do a lot of board mentoring for fintechs, as you said, and a lot of CEO coaching and entrepreneur coaching. Just, what are some of the key things that you pick out, or the traits that you see, habits, traits of everyday entrepreneurs that are really successful versus not? I know it's a bit of a cliche, but I'd love to get your perspective on that.
So for me, when I think about the successful entrepreneur, it's someone who has, I don't know if we want to use the word failed, but struggled, right? Has pushed through it, has gotten through it, has learned. Sometimes it's the school of hard knocks, but some of the entrepreneurs that I work with who are the most successful, they would say failed several times before, and they have gotten up and they've learned from it and they've pushed through it. We've all seen examples of people who've been wildly successful the first time, but that's not the norm. So people who have this determination. I literally think of there are two types of traits that I'm looking for the people I partner with. I want intelligence and passion, right? Determination is built into those. If they have that, I know they can learn anything and they can do anything. I will translate that over to a hiring manager, right? So many people want someone who's done it before, but nobody wants to do the same job before. They want to be challenged. A good hiring manager, I would say, is looking for intelligence and passion, knowing that the long-term result is better. That's the way I think about the entrepreneurs.
Great, excellent. And so about your perfect client, I suppose in this case, the people that are looking to go into your program, who are those people that you're looking for?
We see three types of students that come in that are very interested in the program. So the first, let's call them quant people. So they might be engineers or physics majors or math majors who realize perhaps in the final years at uni, like, no, I don't want a PhD or I don't want to teach. What do I do? Wall Street loves quants. So if you put them through a fast track finishing program, they're good to go. Another type are the liberal arts type students. Now, full disclosure, I was a history major. I studied what I was passionate about. There are other people who do that have quantitative skills. You need to show a hiring manager, not only do you have the liberal arts skills of research, writing, presenting, communicating, but you also have the ability to translate that into their language. So if you go through a program like this, it gives you that stamp on your resume and they see you're a great hire. And the other kind are people that studied the finance, accounting, economics, or business, but maybe they went to university out in the middle of the nowhere where employers are not coming. You don't have the options to work for a top firm like a JP Morgan. So because we're by Boston, which is the number 2 financial hub in America after New York, you have access to all of those companies.
Great, brilliant. And, your work at Gordon, what do you think it will look like in 3 years from today?
I'm hoping that one of the things will change is that the students will be less stressed, but I imagine they'll be more stressed.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing is there's more and more pressure and awareness of students early on of, we don't want to do the entire, in America, it's typical 4 years fast track, your typical path. We're seeing more students try to graduate a semester or even a whole year early. So we're coming in with more advanced placement credits from high school. They're also trying to avoid more debt. And because you're squeezing that down, a lot of people are missing out on some of the extracurriculars, that roundedness. So I imagine that will continue. So it's our job as an educational institution across all of America to figure out, how do we help these students be prepared for the real world? They're getting out there younger, they're graduating with more debt, they're more stressed, they're living in their parents' basement, they're not sure this is the lifestyle that they signed up for, and they're pretty unhappy about it.
Yeah, and what are some of the, I haven't been to uni since I think '94 was the last time I officially was in uni. I'm learning every day, doing courses, and I did a mini MBA at when I was in corporate. But what are some of the techniques that are applied to learn better now than may have been or be different from when I was back in 1994?
It's interesting. The technology is the big one that we're all talking about. And you'll have a lot of discussions about online classes and whether distance learning alone is fine or whether you need to supplement it with occasional visits. So you'd see a lot of grad programs where you show up perhaps once a semester or twice a semester, and you do a lot of work virtually in between. And I think that works for certain programs, and we're all trying to figure out exactly what that is. You will all graduate with the same degree. I would argue not with the same experience. So if we take a program like ours, where you are trying to get a job in financial services, the networking is essential. The ability to be here and get an internship is essential. There are probably other jobs where if you're getting, say, a coding skill, you could probably do that remotely and it doesn't matter. But everyone sort of paints the same brush of online learning. It's good or it's bad. And I think it's a lot more nuanced than that. We know that for sure that young people want convenience, and also cost is a factor for them. And I think that we will see dramatic changes in the quality of technology, what we're allowed to do. Think about international people who generally had come to study in the US without getting into politics. There's some people would say they don't feel as welcome today, so not as many coming. If the technology was an option, they could still be getting the same great education back in wherever they're living.
Yeah, and as far as podcasting is obviously close to my heart, and I love doing this, but also I love listening to podcasts. Has podcasts and audio become a bigger component of learning within a university environment, or is it no different to what it used to be?
No, absolutely. So, for example, Gordon College doesn't have any podcasts yet, and we're about to launch one for our program. We recognize that this is a medium. There's something in the order of, I don't know, was it 500, 800,000, somewhere in these massive range of podcasts out there. Mm-hmm. So anyone starting one today to become wildly successful, rich, and famous is probably unlikely to do that. But there are so many niche subjects that people could be covering. Just like you've said, people are looking to learn about whatever a particular topic is. And if you can describe that for them, hopefully in a fun and engaging way, there's a great value to have for that. So I'm like you. I think you can learn so much from various podcasts.
Yeah, look, I recently moved and I threw out so many books, but it used to be buying books was my way of getting content. Now I can get most of it for free through podcasting. I think it's brilliant. I can listen at 2 times speed, and it just works for me. It doesn't work for everyone, but certainly for me, much rather listen than read in most cases. And as far as at the moment, what's sort of the biggest challenge for you in your role?
So for me, I have 3 activities that I need to do now, right? So when you think about raising awareness and finding the right students and bringing them in, I guess that will always be the case, but even more so when it starts. There's also the setting up of the program. So this is a new business. This is a startup model. I am trying to change the model, how we do it in education, clearly also changing the model of how they've done it, Gordon, before. So in many ways, like you did, I've got a small business inside a big company. We're trying to make change for good. That's always a fun challenge to work through. And I'm building the relationships with employers for the internships, for the full-time jobs, to make sure that our students have the mentorship as they need to go through it. So we've got lots of fun stuff to do. My wife would tell you I'm never bored. There's tons going on, but I love it like that.
Great. And is there anything that you use, any software in particular you use to manage those complex relationships?
So for me, I'm a big fan of Getting Things Done, Alan's book. I love that philosophy. And there's a program called OmniFocus, which I believe might only be in Macs for iOS, but it follows that model and that approach. And I just live in that. So I'm the kind of person who struggles with a million ideas in my head at any one time. And if, here's a technology change, back 15 years ago when I was living in London, I would have a sticky in my pocket all the time to the pen because I have ideas, they pop into my head. I'd want to get them down on paper. I shouldn't forget them because if I've got to think of it twice, that's inefficient. That's a waste of time. So I want to get it down so I don't forget it. And then you had a Palm Pilot, so you could write it down there. Now I've got it in my iPhone, which will sync to my computer in a much more complex software and way that I can track it and measure it and see how it's going. So I love that. That's a big part of my life.
Great, brilliant. So just before we go into the next section, I'd like to mention our BLG tips to help corporate escapees, just like Alexander, to rapidly grow their business. And it's more about that. It's more finding both lifestyle and financial freedom. And you can subscribe to our YouTube channel at Build, Live, Give. So the next section is the live section. So tell us, Alexander, some of the daily habits that you have employed to make you successful.
Well, I guess what I would say first is that I'm always eager to hear other people's ideas and thoughts. I don't have the secret to it. I'm always working on it. So for me, we just talked a minute before about all the stuff that I've got to do on a regular basis. So what I love to do at the end of the day is take stock. So let me think about tomorrow. Let me get my calendar out. I'm going to time block the activities after I've gone through and said, what are the key things I've got to do? So I'm a big fan of that 2x2 matrix of urgency and importance. So I can figure out what I have to do, right? Urgent, important is tomorrow. Then there's the not urgent, not important, which I'm never going to do, delegate it, delete it, defer it, whatever it is. There's the not important but urgent of maybe the president of the college gave me something to do. I've got to fit that in tomorrow. And I'm going to make sure I'm blocking those in there. And the other key for me is the problem is the stuff that's important but not urgent that I've got to get to that I don't. I've got to make sure I'm putting time somewhere in the week to get those through. And I like to color code my calendar so I can see different sorts of tasks at a quick glance to know, am I spending the right amount of time on my different stuff? And that helps me. So then when I get in the next day, because I'm best in the morning, I like first thing when I wake up, I don't want to check my phone. I don't want to see emails. I don't want people telling me what to do. I want to start going through the top tasks right away. So that helps me when I am in my most efficient time to be doing that.
Brilliant, excellent. And we talked before about Rebecca, and I know you got married last April and your honeymoon was in Australia, which was fantastic. But what would you like to say to her when she's listening? So she's listening right now. What are you going to say to her about the support she's given you through this transition from JP Morgan to Gordon?
Lovely and talented is incredible. So she is just basically simply enabling me to be successful. So I just think about, we moved up to a new place in the middle of winter with a daughter who couldn't go outside because she was a preemie, and my wife never complained, and she just worked so hard to make a great family for us. And I couldn't do what I do without her. So I'm blessed to be able to just share that with you. Thank you for asking.
Excellent. And the next section is the give section. So what's a cause or a community that you're passionate about and why?
So Lovely and Talented and I are big fans of World Vision, those types of organizations that support international human aid. And I think all of us have seen the images of the children in different countries that are suffering. It just tugs on my heartstrings. And I guess it takes me back to that sort of Band-Aid stuff from 20 years ago when they were talking about saving the people in Africa and doing the right thing by them. And we still feel like that's what we should be doing.
Excellent. Well, look, the last section is the action section where I'll just ask you some questions and get some rapid fire responses. I know you've come up with a couple, but I'd just love a summary of your top 3 productivity tips.
Sure. So we talked about the matrix, the 2x2. The other two I would throw out there in a quick way is that stressing that good is good enough, the majority of the time. And I don't want perfection to be the enemy of progress. So you're going to be marching forward and knowing when you need perfection, the other times not worrying about it. And that ties in with the other one for me, the 80-20 rule. So I'm a huge fan of thinking about what is the 20% of the activity that's going to generate 80% of the revenue, or where am I spending 20% of my time with all 80% of the stress, and just trying to break down the work that way.
Brilliant. And what are some of the favorite apps or software that you use other than OmniFocus that you mentioned before?
I love one called Pocket, where if I'm looking at a website that I need to save for perpetuity, it'll save it because sometimes you're reading an article on a website and you can't get back to it later. It's blocked or it's locked or whatever it is. Pocket is fantastic, and it works across all my various platforms. And another one I love is Every Dollar. And it's just a simple way it talks about giving a name to everything you spend. So it's a very easy way to link up my bank accounts and my credit card charges. And I can just flip through every couple of days and assign them in and see how the budget is going.
Great. And podcasts or books that you love to listen to?
So I love Adam Grant, who is the top professor at Wharton. He's got one called Work Life, and it is just fantastic. I love his style as well. I'm also a big fan of Freakonomics Radio. I think they do some fascinating stuff.
Great. And it's been really great hearing your perspective on things and changing from 100 hours a week to something that is working less, but I suppose you're contributing in something that's really close to your heart. But what's some parting advice for someone listening that has probably just left corporate or thinking of leaving corporate and want to go out and follow that passion, run their own business? What's your parting advice for them?
I think this is what I learned as I left the serious corporate world, is that don't take life too seriously. Have some laughs, enjoy the journey. I think especially when you're working for yourself now, you got to keep the perspective around it and realize some days are hard, but you're working for a bigger goal, and working for yourself is a gift.
Brilliant. And look, as I said, it was great having you on. I know people can find out more about you and in particular the fantastic course that you've got at gordon.edu/MSFA, which is Masters of Science Financial Analytics. So we will, or is it analysis or analytics?
Analysis, but they both
analysis.
Work.
There you go. Right. So what I'll do is we'll have that and also all the other great links in the show notes. But Alexander, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your corporate escapee story with our community today.
Paul, it was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thanks. That was a fantastic interview with Alexander Lowry. My top 3 takeouts. One was constant learning. So just, there's so much podcasts, so many great material out there at the moment that you can continually learn on a topic. So I think that's one. The second was the 80-20 principle. I know a lot of people talk about it, but Alexander recalled it again. I think it's so important to look for good, not perfect, and really focus on that 20%, not the 80. And the last one was around the real positive benefits of Fintech and how that's going to impact us as small business owners. So I'd love to get your thoughts on this show. So you can email me at paul@builditlivegive.com. Also, if you really enjoyed this and think that people within your network or your community would get value from it, please share it with them. As we're really here to help corporate escapees find both lifestyle and financial freedom. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Corporate Escapees podcast, brought to you by the team at Build, Live, Give. If you found this podcast helpful, please share it with other corporate escapees. If you would like to join a community of like-minded peers, please visit www.buildlivegive.com. Until next time, thanks for listening and be brave.